Who gets to decide whether the United States is at war
The
or
president,
not?
in my opinion.
No.
If we're being invaded,
Actually,
I want the commander-in-chief to know.
Scott, no. It's actually the Congress.
You're asking if we're being invaded.
I'm asking.
You want to call Congress and see if we're being invaded?
I'm asking a basic constitutional
We'll be taken over before they ever get to the committee.
Who gets to decide whether the United States is at war? The answer is Congress.
I'm talking about if we're being invaded.
So when the president says we're at war, he has to
show we're actively at war,
and
not
really
a
what he needs to do is go to Congress.
Well, you guys discuss it in committee.
In this video, Abby Phillip puts Scott Jennings on the spot with a single straightforward question on Newsnight with Abby Phillip, and it completely unravels his argument. What makes this moment so striking is that it goes far beyond a routine disagreement over policy. At its core, this is a confrontation about the Constitution itself. On one side, you have an argument that the president can unilaterally declare an invasion and then rely on archaic wartime-era laws to bypass basic legal protections. On the other, there's a firm reminder of how this country is actually meant to function, with checks, limits, and due process. Because once those protections are stripped away from anyone, everyone's rights are suddenly at risk. Let's break it down and watch how Abby Phillip dismantles Scott Jennings' claims on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
These individual judges are overstepping. What you're essentially saying is that the president, who is the commander-in-chief, cannot determine when we are being invaded. An individual district court judge is going to decide that? No, thank you.
Can I just ask a simple question? Who gets to decide whether the United States is at war or not?
The president, in my opinion.
No.
If we're being invaded, I want the commander-in-chief to know.
Scott, no. It's actually the Congress.
You're asking if we're being invaded.
I'm asking.
You want to call Congress and see if we're being invaded?
I'm asking a basic constitutional
We'll be taken over before they ever get to the committee.
Who gets to decide whether the United States is at war? The answer is Congress.
I'm talking about if we're being invaded.
So when the president says we're at war, he has to
show we're actively at war,
and
not
really what he needs to do is go to Congress.
Well, you guys discuss it in committee. We'll let in another 20 minutes.
Wait a second, though. I thought the genius of our system was that we weren't beholden to one guy's opinion. That the genius of the American system of government was that we had three co-equal branches, and in those co-equal branches, decisions were made about how we go about doing things. Now, we want to tear that to shreds so that we can kowtow to one guy's opinion, then we are in a monarchy. We're being ruled.
What's the distinction between strikes and whether the United States is actually at war with an entity or a nation? And there is a distinction. Now, nobody is saying here Trump can't deport people because, Barack Obama deported a lot of people.
And that's so cheap.
Yeah, I deported a lot of people, and he did so based on the existing law. It is possible to do.
It is not an applicable law.
That's right. Go ahead.
Because
as a lawyer, I would
created
like to answer
the determination that law has to be used at wartime when there's an invasion.
But war is different than it was in 1812.
No, we cannot use colloquialisms to say, we're generally at war.
The Houthis are not a country, and yet we're bombing them.
But let's be clear about this. Nobody is saying that Trump doesn't have the ability to deport people. He has the ability to deport people, and he should, right? There was a lot of people coming in that should not be here. He has the right to do that. But he's trying to use this act to get around due process. And the court is saying this act does not apply. They're not telling him not to deport. They're saying use the process that's in place.
You guys are
this
trying
act
to use
does not apply.
as much bureaucracy and red tape as possible.
No,
it's not bureaucracy.
It's not red tape.
It's the law.
What we're trying to do is use the law. The law. I mean, look, is it such a big problem to say you can do things, but you have to do them lawfully?
Here's what that really exposes. Scott's entire posture here boils down to a single dangerous idea. If the president says, we're being invaded, that's it. Conversation over. Oversight canceled. And on the surface, that sounds tough. It sounds decisive. But listen closely. This is the tell. What he's really advocating is a system where one person gets to unilaterally flip the country into a wartime footing whenever it's politically useful. No vote, no evidence threshold, no institutional pause. And once that switch is flipped, suddenly the president can claim extraordinary powers, sidestepping Congress, bypassing courts, and brushing past basic rights. That's not strength. That's not resolve. That's a shortcut. That's not leadership. That's a cheat code dressed up as patriotism. And this is where democracy meets denial. Dante and Van don't need to raise their voices, because the founders already anticipated this exact argument. They understood something fundamental. War powers are the most dangerous powers a government can have. That's why the Constitution deliberately places the authority to declare war in Congress, not in the hands of one individual. The system was designed to slow this down on purpose. Because once you allow a president to declare, "We're at war," based on vibes, fear, or political convenience, everything changes. Every policy problem starts looking like a battlefield. Every disagreement starts looking like a threat. And every person, especially the most vulnerable, starts getting treated like a potential enemy. That's why the courts matter here. Not because judges are trying to block deportations, but because they're doing what courts are supposed to do in a functioning democracy. Ask whether the government is using the right law for the right situation in the right way. The Alien Enemies Act isn't just another immigration statute. It's a wartime authority meant for declared conflicts with actual state actors. Historically, it's been used during major wars, and it carries a dark track record when stretched beyond its purpose, because it collapses individual judgment into guilt by association. And here's the part that keeps getting conveniently ignored. Due process is not a courtesy. It's not a reward. It's not a perk reserved for people you agree with. It's the firewall that protects everyone from a government becoming sloppy, vengeful, or lazy with power. The moment you normalize, "We don't need hearings, just trust the president," you're no longer talking about law and order. You're talking about obedience.
There's a process.
We think this is lawful.
But it's not.
But the court just said it's
one
not.
judge, one stupid judge, and I want to see what the rest of them say.
You know, it's
Yes,
Why is
and
that stupid? Because
I guess
he
we have to
disagrees
remind
with the
everybody
assessment
here
of
that
Donald
Trump appointed this judge.
I don't care.
Okay?
Again, it
so this
doesn't
is a
matter.
Trump-appointed judge.
He's
also
he's
his
not
ruling
infallible.
only extends
Judges
to
make
his
stupid
district,
decisions
right?
all the
Yes.
time.
Well, okay,
So the ruling's
how about
not
this?
actually that
So
big
you
of a
say the
deal.
judge is
Because you
stupid.
got back
How do we
to
know
the
that?
second, guys.
How do we know that
Go
the
ahead.
president is stupid?
I'm sure that's your opinion.
Oh, it certainly is.
But he won the election. And
So what does
I
that
don't
mean?
think anybody, listen, I don't think anybody is stupid. I think all three branches
definitely
have the
some
right
people
to
that are stupid.
operate the way they want. I think the President of the United States
Introduce you to
has
my
the
brother.
right to operate based on his opinion because he's voted in. But the judicial branch has the right to interpret the meaning of the law the way they see it.
Can I
That's
ask
their
you a
right.
question? Let me
And
ask you a question.
to make proof of requirement.
This
Due process
is a
of
key question.
requirement.
What if another group of people, say not illegal aliens, but just some other group from somewhere else, actually came to the shores of the United States, not a nation, but say a group, any kind of group, and actually did come ashore and try to invade, I don't know what else you would call it, the United States? Would you run to court and ask a federal judge if the President of the United States can we defend the nation now?
But that's
can
not
we
what-
stop
that's
the?
not what we're talking
It
about.
is. They're coming
It's a different
across.
issue.
They're
You were
coming across
also,
the
you were
border.
also
doing that.
generalizing here. You were
Yes.
talking about, yes, I agree with you. I agree with you, Scott.
But what's the
Hold
difference?
on, listen
What's
to
the
me.
difference?
Because there will be a
If they're-
declaration of
hold on.
war
If
and then the
they're-
act would
if
how
they're-
quickly.
If they're
Hold on,
gang
Scott and
members
Dante, let
and
me
if
touch you
they're
on.
killing or raping women in this country, they should absolutely be deported, and there should be deportation orders, and there should be a process, and there is a process to deport them. You are saying that every person that is here illegally
Yes.
is raping people, and
No,
that
I
is
did not
not
say that.
true.
You lied.
Yes,
You're
you're
lying.
saying they're
You're
all
lying.
part of these gangs.
lying.
They all,
Well, you're-
this is
back
they're
because you're not
invading
what I
our
said.
country. They're doing all these things.
You're certainly
They are
associating them.
They're not all violent, but they are all
not all
criminal.
violent.
But
They're
they
not
are
all
all- but
violent.
they are all criminal.
And everybody, whether they are 2 years old or whether they are 90 years old and have been in our country the entire time, they deserve a process. The criminals.
I'm sorry, they
criminals.
What process did they follow to get here? The process of breaking our laws?
Well, because there is a law, there are laws in order, and there are deportation proceedings to get these people out of our country.
Listen how long you want this to last.
The 99-year-old who is here did not invade our country.
Listen closely. This is the tell. When Scott Jennings calls a judge stupid simply because he doesn't like the ruling, he's not critiquing the law. He's admitting something else entirely. He doesn't actually want neutral rules. He wants a referee who only makes calls for his team. And that's not how a constitutional system works. Lifetime federal judges exist for a reason. They're deliberately insulated from polls, cable news outrage, Fox segments, and whoever won the last election. Their job isn't to protect a president's feelings. It's to read the statute, measure it against the Constitution, and answer one question. Does this action actually fit the law? That's not judicial activism. That's the design doing exactly what it was built to do. And here's where the argument gets even more revealing. Scott Jennings keeps framing immigration as a battlefield invasion. But legally, and historically, an invasion is not just a large number of people crossing a border. In U.S. constitutional history, invasion means an armed hostile force, a foreign military, an organized attack. Words matter here because once you let presidents redefine invasion whenever it's politically convenient, you hand them emergency powers on demand. Today it's migrants, tomorrow it's protesters, next week it's whoever gets labeled an extremist. Once the definition becomes vibes, rights become optional. There's another sleight of hand happening too. The "they're all criminals" line deliberately blurs civil violations with violent crime. Most immigration violations are civil matters, like overstaying a visa, not felony convictions. And even if you want stricter enforcement, we already have deportation laws on the books that work. ICE has deported people under every administration using existing legal processes. So the real question isn't whether dangerous individuals can be removed. They can. The real question is why reach for the most extreme, wartime-style authority when normal enforcement tools already exist? That's why Van's point lands. You don't get law and order by turning millions of human beings into one faceless category and skipping the basic step of proving who actually did what. Because without that process, what you get isn't safety. You get errors, you get abuse, you get the government sweeping up the wrong people, including legal residents and even U.S. citizens. And that's not hypothetical. It's happened before, more times than people like to admit. That's why the 99-year-old example matters. It exposes the absurdity of this invasion framing. Someone who's lived here for decades didn't invade anything. They built a life. And a democracy that can't tell the difference between the two is a democracy that's already losing its grip on the rule of law.
Let me let you get a word in.
Well, to me, like the energy in defense of these gangbangers.
I'm not defending them. I just said gangs should leave.
I feel like that poem where it's like, first they came for the guy who beats his wife, and I said nothing because I don't beat my wife. And then they came for the guy who said, I love killing Jews, and I said nothing because I don't love killing Jews. And now they came for the gangbangers, and I said nothing.
Can I say something real quick? Do you know why that triggers me? That triggers me because I come from a place where a whole bunch of people, they're American citizens, but they're thrown away. They're thrown away because they might have committed crimes, because they got in trouble when they were young.
You should be the angriest that they care about the gangbangers and not those people.
No, what I care about is that there is a system of laws that is supposed to protect the due process of those people.
Yeah.
And that has to matter more than what society thinks about whatever they've done.
Didn't get due process. I don't know why the Democrats are not angry about that. Because they're not citizens. We do not owe them the same thing. It has to mean something to be an American.
Bachi, you are saying essentially that you don't like the way that the law
No.
is applied in this instance, and you would like to change it, which is
No,
fine.
I'm not saying that, Abby. I'm saying every other district judge has ruled in Trump's favor
That's
on
not
this.
true.
No,
That is absolutely not true. That is not
That is
true.
not true.
No other
That is
judge,
not
and let me
true.
clarify this. This is important.
And
No
by the
other
way,
judge.
it will go to the Supreme
Hold on,
Court.
let me let Dante
No
finish,
other
and then we gotta
judge
go.
has issued an opinion on this specific issue.
Yes, they've not ruled against it.
No. What the Supreme Court said was the judge that it was in front of did not have the authority to make this decision. It wasn't in the right district, so he sent it to Texas. This is the first judge that's ruled on this actual case of whether or not this rule or this law applies, the Enemies Aliens Act. And they said it does not apply.
Also,
This is the first time it was ruled
Six
on
other
that.
federal judges have issued provisional orders on this issue of whether and how, but really specifically how.
But it's
the
how?
Trump
Constitutional question,
administration
though, because they
can
think-
deport these people.
Because you all are debating the statutes and the judge's right to oversee a statute. What the Trump administration is arguing is that this is a foreign policy issue, and we have sole right under the Constitution to execute American foreign policy. So they actually see themselves as above this conversation about individual judges micromanaging.
And I think
only
that that's
thing
a
that this act
novel
does
interpretation. We got to go, but that's, I mean,
you've heard multiple officials say
Scott,
that.
I think you would acknowledge this is a novel interpretation of.
I would add proper as well.
Okay, novel interpretation of
And
the
proper.
use of this particular statute for
And the only
immigration.
purpose of this use of this statute is to get around due process. Everything else is the same,
I think
except
the
for this
purpose is to
statute, we
protect
don't
American
need due
citizens from
process.
the invasion.
And why do we want to get around that?
Here's the uncomfortable truth laid bare. The U.S. government has a long and repeated history of expanding emergency powers whenever fear strikes. And once those powers are in place, they almost never stay neatly contained. Take the Patriot Act. Sold to the public as a narrow tool to fight terrorism, it quickly morphed into sweeping domestic surveillance, tracking ordinary Americans in ways most never imagined. Civil asset forfeiture was sold as a way to stop drug kingpins, yet in practice it became a tool for law enforcement to seize money from regular people without ever charging them with a crime. That's the exact pattern Van is warning about. This isn't about protecting criminals. It's about protecting the guardrails that prevent the state from becoming judge, jury, and executioner. When you dismantle those guardrails, even for efficiency, you start moving toward a system where power reigns unchecked, not law. And let's confront another huge misconception head on. When Scott Jennings says these migrants aren't citizens, so they don't deserve the same protections, he's fundamentally misunderstanding the Constitution. Due process isn't a VIP perk. It isn't reserved for people you agree with or like. The Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed that any person on U.S. soil, citizen or not, has constitutional protections in legal proceedings. That doesn't mean they get to vote, of course, but it does mean they have the right to be heard, the right to a neutral judge, and the right not to be punished based solely on a government allegation. These protections exist to make sure the machinery of power does not crush people arbitrarily, and they apply to everyone, not just the politically convenient. The way Scott and others frame invasion is also deliberately misleading. Legally, in U.S. history, an invasion doesn't mean a crowd of people crossing a border. It refers to a hostile armed force, a foreign military or organized attack. If presidents are allowed to redefine invasion whenever it suits them politically, then any administration, today or in the future, could use the same logic to declare a foreign threat and sidestep courts entirely. Once you normalize bypassing courts for the people society dislikes most, it becomes much easier to bypass courts for anyone society merely finds inconvenient. That's the real danger. That's why Abby Phillip's point about the statute is so critical. The reason the Trump administration wants to use this specific law isn't because deportation is impossible otherwise. Deportation happens every single day under existing immigration law across every administration. The so-called benefit of this extreme statute is speed and fewer legal hurdles. But when a government's biggest selling point is that it can operate without due process, that's exactly when citizens, lawmakers, and judges should be skeptical. The stakes couldn't be higher. Facts, process, and the rule of law aren't optional. They're the firewall that keeps a democracy from sliding into arbitrary authority. Once you let shortcuts replace courts and power replace process, you're no longer enforcing law and order. You're empowering obedience. And in a country founded on checks and balances, that is exactly what the founders warned us against.